Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the deep dive, the building blocks of an efficient, effective control room. My name's Tim Ward. I'm the Director of Product Strategy and Marketing here at StarCompliance. And I'm delighted to be joined by Steve Brown from Compliance Risk Concepts. Steve, hi there. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Good to see you this morning, Tim. I hope you're well. My name is Steve Brown. I'm a director with Compliance Risk Concepts. It's a boutique focused on broker-dealers and registered investment advisors. And amongst other things, I focus specifically on control rooms, investment banking, research, conflict type issues for our clients. I've been in the industry over 25 years and spent a decent bulk of my time in-house building and managing control rooms globally. And so this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. So it's good to be with everyone this morning.
Great, thanks, Steve. And that word control room means so many different things to different people. And I'm sure you've seen lots of different permutations and varieties of different types of control room. Can you kick us off just by describing what a control room is and how that varies across different firm types from your experience?
Absolutely. So simply said, a control room attempts to control the flow of material non-public information within a firm. And so what does that mean? It really varies by the nature of what the firm does. And, you know, one of the biggest challenges I think that we see is figuring out what the control room should cover. And Tim, I know we're going to talk a little bit about how does a control room clearly define its mandate and its scope. And, you know, without a doubt, in my mind, as a control room gets started, even when it's mature, it's always good to go back and say, who are we covering? What are the types of businesses that we're covering? What are the types of products we're covering? And do we understand them in order to, quote unquote, control the flow of material non-public information?
And setting that mandate, is that important because control rooms evolve over time or personnel change or the business has different expectations of what they expect from the control room?
I think that it's a little bit of that, but I also think that it's really has to do with the evolution of the business and the markets in which the business is in. And many control rooms are part of larger financial institutions. And I think that without a doubt, oftentimes control rooms start within the broker-dealer. And that's an appropriate place to start. And, you know, that can cover many different areas from equity to debt, to rates, to loans, to research, to investment banking. And so I firmly believe that as a control room gets started, and even during its maturity, that it's wise to really gain and understand the inventory of different types of products and clients and customers that the firm services. And so I've always been a firm believer that if one can understand the businesses through things like just simple conversations and inventorying the types of products and services that a firm offers, that they can then identify the applicable rules. And so if you can understand the business and then understand the rules, then hopefully one can go about implementing policies and procedures to address and control the flow of material non-public information. So I think that, you know, sure, staff is super important, but first and foremost, you need to understand the business in order to build the control room.
So it sounds like that control room leader has to be connected with all sorts of different parts of the business. They've got to understand the changes, the products that are sold, the different jurisdictions that that firm covers, any organic growth or merger and acquisition activity from the firm itself, and
Absolutely
just kind
right.
of really thoroughly understand what the different activities are. So does that mean that the control room leader often has to come from within? Are they recruited from the business, or do they need to be kind of compliance specialists or generalists? Like, what makes a good kind of control room leader?
Well, it's a great question. And I think that it's great to have a some business acumen, if you will, to understand how the business operates. But it's also important to have just a good broad compliance mindset. And so whether one is an attorney or one comes from the business or one is just a generalist compliance person, then it really comes down to, I think, the individual. And just speaking from experience, I always felt like I had to know a little bit about many different things. And quite frankly, that is the challenge, and that's where the stress comes from. In keeping up with the multitude of products that a firm offers. And so, Tim, I think you and I have often talked about what makes a good control room person. Well, you have to be curious, and you can't be afraid to ask questions, even if it may come across as a dumb question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. If one doesn't understand the business, then it's okay to ask. It's okay to express a desire to learn, because frankly, most of the business people out there, quote unquote, the clients of the control room, are more than happy to have those conversations because it behooves them in order to have good quality control room coverage. So
yeah, I think it's interesting that sort of people coming from a compliance background potentially finding themselves in control room. I think it's important, if you do have that legal and compliance background, that you've also got that kind of inquiring mind. And if you don't, if you're not from a particular business unit or a business area, that you make sure you've got listening posts that can tell you what's really going on in that business, so that you can inquire and ask the right questions and kind of know which stones to to look under. So I think a lot of that's about building up a bit of variety in your control room of different backgrounds, different experiences, people who are going to ask unusual questions or come at things from slightly unusual angles. There's a real kind of investigative kind of angle to working in the control room.
that's right. It's you put yourself in the shoes of a business person, sales, trading, research, banking. Oftentimes it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
And so it just happens that, a control room compliance person's clients are internal. And it's important to make relationships across the entire firm. So when challenging situations or questions do arise, you have developed a rapport and a relationship with the business where it's easy to, in non-COVID times, walk down to the floor and have a conversation, or now have a call or an email or a Zoom meeting to inquire and ask and try to get to a solution that is beneficial and protects the reputation, the risk of the firm.
So let's say we've got our control room set up. We've now got a clear mandate of what we're looking at and the business units. We've got a good understanding of the business. What's really the next step? Is it around getting policies and procedures and kind of controls in place, or some sort of building some sort of framework for that control room to operate in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's the building blocks, and that's the challenge of the control room, and that's why it's so awesome, frankly, to have fellow industry colleagues within other control rooms to have the opportunity to pick up the phone and call and ask, what are you folks doing? But oftentimes, so yeah, it's policies, procedures, controls, but Tim, as we've talked about, it's like, what are the greatest challenges? And I mean, frankly, it's just being aware of what's going on. And so, of course, that comes with having well thought out policies, procedures, and controls. So how do you identify what should go on the watch list and at what point in time? And how does one identify what should go on the restricted list and at what point in time? And, sure, there are some rules that speak to it, but it's also a lot of just going back and understanding the business and trying to figure out, when are we reasonably likely to be engaged to do an investment banking transaction? And so how are we going to be notified? And, whether it's a very manual process or whether, firms have a great automated notification tool, whatever works, the control room needs to figure that out. And they need to think through, how are we going to deal with the volume? Whether it's 10 things on the watch list, 10 projects on the watch list, or 1,000 projects on the watch list, regardless, control room leaders and managers need to think about the scope of their coverage. How are they going to deal with things on a day-to-day basis? How are they going to capture watch list items? Where are they going to capture watch list items? And how are they going to do it repeatedly? And, to me, that's like control room 101, the basic building blocks. But if control rooms don't get that right, that's the foundation, that's the bedrock.
Yeah, I think when Star first started to look at depth at the control room, probably over 2 years ago, the control room team described the importance, obviously, of the watch list and the restricted list, and what that meant, and how that information got on there, and how that gets communicated to lots of other downstream systems. And as technologists, we looked at that and thought, well, that looks pretty simple. It just looks like a list of kind of companies and restrictions, and things go on and come off, no big deal, right? And when we peeled back a few of the layers, and then we understood, the timing issues, the challenges around those items becoming stale, the fact that some organizations have hundreds, if not thousands, of deals in transit at any particular time, how that information can come from almost any corner of the organization. You take something that's fairly simple, like keeping a list of restricted or securities, into something that becomes, really quite complex, just because there's so much dependency on that list elsewhere, and it can trigger so many other actions. So I think that's really where having the consistency of the policies and procedures and the understanding across the control room, to so that individual team members understand the process, that they're protecting themselves and the firm, that there's an audit trail, that there's history, that information is readily available, and the tools, as you say, to gather that information. Often there's a big emphasis on the control room to collect that information and pull it from the organization, rather than have it sort of pushed towards them.
That's right. And many, even very mature organizations, and speaking with my old industry colleagues and friends, are going through the process of actually developing workflows. How are we consistently doing something every single time, regardless of what the engagement is or what the situation is? Because as firms grow from one person in the control room to a team, the consistency of capturing watch list items and then perhaps moving it to the restricted list, depending on the circumstances, is really critical. So I really believe that, another big challenge, once control rooms figure out their coverage, they're getting the information, how are they going to do it consistently, is, I think, a super challenge. And to the extent that you can build in and utilize technology, awesome. To the extent that you're still doing it on an Excel spreadsheet, so be it. We all started there at some point in time. And then it's really about finding and training control room employees, I think. And Tim, I know that we're going to talk a little bit about that. But I think it's sort of like, I've talked about the Tour de France, if I may just use an analogy quickly. But, you think about what the control room's mandate is. Well, if you think about the Tour de France, it's like 21 days, over 2,100 miles, going up mountains, going down mountains, going on flat roads. But you know what? The person that wins it is around a team. And each of those team members have different responsibilities. And so I sort of equate, the control room to the Tour de France. It is not a sprint. It is a long slog. And on top of that, you've got the eyes of the world on you. And, you know, you've got to feel like those riders are under a great deal of pressure. Having been in a control room and experienced that for many years, there's a lot of similarities, if you will, to that race. And at times you just like, I'm just so worn out and tired, but you just got to keep pedaling and keep going. And ultimately, you know, you'll get there. So,
and I think it's that, you know, one of the other things that we observed to that point around when we started to understand more about the operation of the control room and the importance of some of those key areas like the watch list and restricted list and conflicts checking and just deal management itself, we did feel it was an area that was underserved a little bit by technology. And we'll come on to kind of the technological aspect a little bit later in the conversation. But yeah, we were passionate about building better tools, right, to help in that fairly stressful, time-sensitive environment. And I think the decision support tools or inbuilt help to augment some of the workflows or to deliver help at the point of need or to bring operational information from large, thick manuals that are sitting on people's desks actually into the product so that there's guidance and help at the point of need and reminders and things of that sort, hopefully will help, you know, the control rooms deal with that kind of volume and that under pressure kind of activity. And where does that pressure generate from? Is it the kind of the time sensitivity of the information? Is it the sheer volume? Is it the types of people that you're interacting with? What's driving that pressure, do you think, Steve?
I think that when firms are multi-dimensional and there's banking, but then trading, sales, and research, I oftentimes with clients talk about there are policy requirements and then there are regulatory requirements. And so I think that some of the pressure, frankly, is that some of the rules are very prescriptive. Some of the rules are not. You know, here in the States, you have Reg M, you have 14E3, 14E5. You have different research safe harbor rules, 138 and 139. And so when you start to have regulatory requirements that firms have to comply with versus just policy requirements, that pressure to identify situations where those rules may be triggered really ratchets up, I think, the pressure within the control room. And so again, in order to even get there, the control room has to know about the situation. They have to know about it timely. They have to have the opportunity to assess it before a transaction is announced, for instance, in order to potentially restrict. And if the control room is going to restrict certain types of trading or certain types of research, there has to be a way for the control room to notify those folks that are being restricted. And oftentimes there are safe harbors or there's a little bit of flexibility around what the restriction is. But again, having the foresight to think through those ahead of time before you get to a situation where there is a restriction is really critical. And that's where technology can help, whether it's the identification and notification of a transaction or the communication of restriction that also helps inform sales and trading of what the restriction is and what is allowed. And then the same with research. So, you know, it's a combination of those things, Tim.
Yeah, I think if technology can help do some of the automation of the more routine tasks like communicating restrictions and gathering deal updates and setting reminders, then hopefully that frees up the control room to do some of those more human tasks like the investigation, the joining of the dots, the sort of forensic analysis. And we talked a little bit about sort of the control room leader, but what about the control room team themselves? Is it difficult to recruit into this area and to get the right skill sets?
Uh, yeah, again, just speaking from experience and not having at the time being in New York or Chicago or San Francisco or London, um, it is when the control room is located in an area where there is not a huge pool of knowledgeable compliance people or even legal folks, then it is really challenging to find the right personnel. And so oftentimes I think that it comes down to doing a great deal of interviewing and trying to find smart, curious, open-minded people with a well-rounded background. Um, the very first person I hired was someone that had graduated from Juilliard School of Music. And I figured that if she had the ability to be accepted there and could play the piano as well as she could play, that she could probably pick up on some control room stuff. and so and so she turned out to be a great employee. But it's just it's taking the time, and it's not easy, and it's probably going to be, you're probably, control room managers are probably going to have to go through a number of folks to find the right mix. But I would, it's a challenge.
Yeah, we followed a similar strategy around recruiting software developers in the past, and we found that kind of musical acumen and degrees in psychology and things of that sort were just as good indicators as an engineering or a kind of computer science degree.
Yeah.
So, is a good control room person, are they kind of, as you say, bright, analytical, curious in terms of asking the right questions, and then you hope that you can build up that business and financial knowledge kind of around that. But ultimately, it sounds like, that could be a multi-month or a multi-year project to get a good control room team member. So once you got them, you got to hang on to them, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about sort of the control room, setting the mandate. We've got our policies and procedures in place, and hopefully we've now acquired a team, and they understand how to operate in that environment. What other challenges do you see control rooms facing today? And specifically, is there anything that you've observed around the current situation with the pandemic, for example?
Well, we can't leave the conversation without talking about what's going on. And I think that firms of all shapes and sizes have done a remarkable job during these past, 6 months now, and adapting to working from home. Without a doubt, though, I think that it does, going back to our conversation about building relationships and maintaining relationships, and really keeping, the old adage, your finger on the pulse of what's going on. I think that to me, one of the greatest challenges is the connectivity within the control room and the communication within the team. And so for those control rooms that also are responsible for surveillance, and there are, dedicated surveillance analysts, one of the things that worries me, and certainly if I were in-house still managing, that I would try to focus on is, our former president, Ronald Reagan, said, trust but verify. Well, when it comes to surveillance, and just with the magnitude, trading volume has increased exponentially over the years. Some firms have been able to keep up with things like technology to help out. And so whether it's employee trading or firm trading or customer trading, but just the volume of that activity coming through the control room, with watch list, restricted list hits, conflict clearance, ensuring that the team that's responsible for doing surveillance is properly vetting, identifying, clearing, escalating surveillance hits is so very critical, because that is really part and parcel to the control room, control room reporting. So, what the Insider Trading and Securities Fraud Enforcement Act says is that you have to have adequate policies and procedures in place to prevent and detect. The prevention is all the policies and procedures and training and whatnot. The detection, frankly, is surveillance. And so if you don't have prevention and detection, then you're not going to be successful. And so from those work from home times, managing the surveillance team and ensuring that they are properly escalating hits is something that I would really focus on, to make sure that whatever process or procedures you have in place that you think through, are they working, have constant touch points with your team. Maybe you think about having an open Zoom call all day long. Maybe it's a chat that's open all day long. Whatever it is, I think that control room managers need to think through that and make sure that they're comfortable with the construct that they've come up with.
Yeah, it's replicating those ad hoc encounters that we'd normally have in the office, right? Just the conversation over the cubicle or at the water cooler, or can I get a second opinion, or this or that. And there's a slight barrier in doing that with remote working. Lots of firms and teams have got really adept at the Zoom calls and the chats and so forth, but it still takes a trigger sometimes, particularly for junior team members or less experienced team members, to reach out and feel confident that they can ask a question or get a second opinion. And I think you're right, having open Zoom calls or open chats, or even just scheduled sessions around showing near misses, or just picking a records at random or sampling. It's just that testing of the program, just to make sure that those things are still being done in a consistent kind of way as well. And I think also just even more awareness and engagement in terms of the handling of inside information in general, particularly within everybody's new workplace, right, where there's lots more opportunity to exchange information just from the natural kind of physical environment that people are in.
That's right. And so to that point, whether it's banking, sales, trading, research, whatever the case may be, oftentimes, folks are working from home, obviously. And so with that, some folks may have roommates or spouses, family members that are in the industry, or may work for public companies, or may pose some type of conflict. And so I think, I firmly believe that most firms have thought through this, but I think that it's something that we all need to continue to be diligent in our approach, because the natural informational barriers are not there. People are not coming into a building and where you have a natural environment that control rooms probably have thought a great deal about. Everyone is spread out. So to the extent that firms haven't and are not continuing to update their training and their guidance, I would strongly encourage firms to do that, whether it's, more frequent training sessions or attestations, or touch points with their clients, because, I think that this, this work from home thing, it's work-life balance. It's, working all times of the day, making sure that control rooms have coverage, but also making sure that control rooms have thought through and provided good guidance, and have collected and identified conflict situations that perhaps weren't present or as present in the past. Tim, I think I've said to you before that, is to think about conflicts, you think about firm conflicts, employee conflicts, customer conflicts. And, we put out a little control room quarterly last quarter that talked about maybe there's a fourth conflict, and that would be the home. And so what are firms doing to think through that? So definitely a challenge that we need to stay vigilant.
You also picked up on the related point around control room teams and maintaining that kind of work-life balance, which, you know, a lot of people are finding it difficult, even more difficult, blurring the line between kind of work and home life. You alluded to potentially global control rooms, having multiple control rooms in different regions. Do you see deals and the workload being passed across those regions to allow that kind of work-life balance, or do you think it's still more typical that even a firm with multiple control rooms would retain their own deals kind of from start to finish through that life cycle?
So a couple things. I think that the larger global firms have done a very good job over the past decade, at least, of implementing a follow the sun model where there is good handoff. I do think that there probably are some global capital markets firms out there that still try to self-contain within the region. I don't know. I think that that's a challenge, and I'm not sure that I totally buy into that. But I think that, you know, control room officers, we're all in the same boat, and we all are all dealing with the same issue. And so to the extent that there can be trust or you know, service level agreements put in place between regions to allow for the handoff, there can be a lot of efficiency gained there. I think for those firms that are, you know, more domestic, if you will, wherever the region, that don't have the global challenge, I do think that, you know, firms that the business is working not just, you know, 7 to 7 or 9 to 5 or whatever you want to say. They're working all different types of hours, and so with that, control room issues come into the control room for remediation. I think that creates a real challenge for control room folks that are working from home, that have kids or have other responsibilities. And so I think that it's imperative that control room managers understand that and make sure that they provide enough flexibility for folks that have children that may not have daycare or nannies, or they're not going to school, that they're homeschooling. And so it's a real life situation. And so people have to recognize that and say, well, what can we do to help out there? And, you know, it's sort of an interesting conundrum that firms have spent a lot of money on real estate. And so, you know, Tim, we were talking about, well, maybe if firms decide not to go back full time, maybe not go back at all because there haven't been any lapses, so there's less real estate demands. So maybe you reallocate that budget to staff, maybe you reallocate it to technology. And I think that it will be interesting to see how it plays out, but there may be an opportunity here to address the challenges of, working from home, more demands, from an hour perspective. Folks aren't commuting. Folks don't have to, firms don't have to allocate so much to real estate, which is expensive. And so maybe there's an opportunity to reassess staffing levels in the control room and technology.
Yeah, I think that it's obviously budget season at the moment, and I think firms up and down the country and around the world are having those types of conversations around what has been learned through this period, obviously what's forecast for the year ahead. But it does feel like there'll be a lasting legacy from this year, and a change of working style, of working practices, of blending between working from home and hybrid versions of people coming into the office. And we've seen increased sort of spending on compliance tools and technology projects that were previously on hold have now gone ahead, because I think firms do realize how important these technology kind of communication tools are, to the process, and there has to be some kind of redundancy. You can't just rely on those office conversations. There's got to be a backup, and it looks like people are definitely planning for this to continue in some shape or form to different degrees. And I mean, a lot of teams, I think, also found some efficiencies, as you say, with not traveling and not spending, on real estate, or not having difficulties getting meeting space or office space. So I do think there will be some lasting legacies from this year in particular. So thinking back, we alluded to it during the conversation, but thinking back to your kind of time running the control room and in discussing it with your clients, what can technology bring? What would you like to see technology bring to the party kind of in the future as well?
So without a doubt, if firms and employees aren't traveling, as I think about bankers interacting with, whether it's issuer clients or borrowers, or sales and trading, interacting with retail customers or institutional investors, the evolution of new types of communication tools, I think that it will continue to evolve. And so whether it's, through social media or other types of video conferences or whatnot. And so again, just going back, if firms are not necessarily going into a building, the natural informational barriers aren't there. If new communication technology comes into play, how are we going to assess the informational barriers, and what are we going to do to monitor those types of tools? And so, I know that firms are doing virtual research conferences. That's something that always had been in person in the past. Firms are looking at virtual types of entertainment. That had always been something that had been in person in the past. I don't know what else is going to come down the pike, but I think that without a doubt, making sure that firms have the ability to monitor and, where necessary, restrict access will be critical in order to just maintain the informational barriers and also do surveillance.
Yeah, I mean, I think we share some of those things as well. I mean, we spent the first 18 months really of our own development on control room, really focusing on record keeping activities, workflows, things that will make the control room team members' life easier. But now very much our future focus is on integrating with many more systems in different ways. It'd be fairly typical for a client of ours to perhaps have 10 integrations, if not more, collecting data directly from CRM systems and research systems and trading and order management systems. And in fact, even the firms who have 10 integrations would rather have 20 or 30. They really would like these control room applications to be plugged into as many possible systems as possible. I think we're also seeing conflict searching getting more sophisticated. So the ability to pick up conflicts that are less direct, that perhaps don't have unique identifiers, that are perhaps 1 or 2 or 3 places removed from the actual data that's in place. And then, as you say, more automation and decision support. I think our clients almost fall into 2 categories. One that says we'll never see full automation in the control room. It will always require a kind of a human brain to dissect the information and make a decision. But then there's others that say, yeah, actually there's lots of activity that we would feel comfortable putting a framework in place and taking a risk-based approach and making decisions based on that. And I think that, of course, depends on the type of firm and the type of activity that is being dealt with. And then finally, you mentioned it on that surveillance piece. I think I was talking to a client yesterday, and they were saying, I want to turn my compliance team into a non-compliance team. And what they were getting at was all of the framework and the infrastructure of compliance, like certifications and policies and procedures and attestations, and that getting to the point where that's mature enough so that that's embedded and it just works. And then really zeroing in on, are all those controls working, and what don't we know, and what data don't we have, and which data is not complete, and really getting more into that investigative area.
Being an investigator.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And really uncovering, reducing the risk and adding value by, really uncovering that 0.01% of activity or people or projects that might, actually result in, a possible issue there. And I think it's quite timely with the SEC announcement yesterday around the insider trading case relating to kind of an index constituent and trading before that. Just always gives you another example of something that seems so blatant is actually can be very difficult to detect, because by its nature it tends to circumnavigate a lot of the traditional controls, and the only thing that can really uncover that type of behavior is a very deep level of surveillance and cross-checking of lots of different information sources to potentially get something that's going to make a control room person or a compliance person take a little bit of a longer look and spend 5 more minutes on that person or activity than they would. And they can only really do that if the rest of the framework is running efficiently and they've got the tools in place to deal with the business as usual kind of activity to free up space for that more, for that investigation, right?
I agree. Responding to a couple of things you said there, I've always said that, in a control room, especially where there's not integration, at times I felt like I needed a swivel chair to swivel from one system to the next, and how awesome it would be if I were able to integrate it all. Back in the day, that was a real big challenge. I think today it's a heck of a lot easier with the technology that's available, whether it's looking at semantic type technology of structured and unstructured data, or just something even more simple that just brings that can ingest information from various sources and provide a picture of what's going on in order for an analyst to then become an investigator, as you said. So I think that is, I'd like to think that that's the future of the control room. And without a doubt, but then the next thing that you said was, you never can replace the human element of it. And I think that, going back to an earlier part of our conversation about finding the right people, training them, it's even more difficult now because, we're all remote, but training them, whether you're a surveillance analyst or a control room, client manager, what questions to ask and what's the next question, and are we seeing the big picture, or is there something on that report that is, blaring, but the analyst doesn't know what question to ask. And so I think that, could you get there with workflows? Perhaps. I think that there's a lot of work still to do there. And then that just comes back to just plain simple training of the team and educating them on how products work, what to look for, what are the what's our risk tolerance, if you will, once we identify something, and at what point do we say we have enough information to make an informed decision, or we need to continue to investigate it further. Those are all really important things, I think, that control rooms need to think about whatever the situation is in order to get to a point where, well, do we have a conflict situation? Do we have an insider trading situation? Can we allow a piece of research to go out? That's the fun part of the control room. But it takes time to get there, and it takes just a lot of being exposed to a lot of different situations to get your mind around what we're looking for, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's just it's almost like playing those, as you say, it's a whole combination of experience, like playing different scenarios, getting advice from more experienced people within the team, building your own community of firms. And that's why the industry events and the community events and the user groups are also, a big part of control room. And we find it's a very tight kind of community as well. And even competing firms very open to sharing kind of processes and tips and sort of best practice as well. We'll finish off. I mean, we talked a little bit last week, Steve, around the hope for technology, but sometimes the frustration as well that technology hasn't delivered in some of those areas as quick as people would like. We hear a lot about big data and integration and sentiment analysis and graph networks, all this fantastic technology that you would think could be applied to this area, but still firms, after spending lots of years building either internal systems or spending a relatively large amount of money, haven't quite realized that vision. Why do you think that is? What are some of the factors that might be causing some of that frustration?
Oftentimes, I think that it requires, so listen, control rooms and compliance are part of the organization, and there are a lot of demands on the organization. And so there's a lot of demands on the internal technology team as well. And so sometimes it's about building a business case that consists of use cases that whether it's the chief compliance officer or the head of the control room, taking it to senior management that is responsible for the budget and convincing them with real life examples that perhaps the firm has been through or that others in the industry have been through, and putting forth an argument that our firm has risk, and unless we pursue this solution, whatever the solution is, then it's going to be difficult for us to continue to, quote unquote, control the flow of material non-public information with any sense of within our risk tolerance scheme. And so I think that that's where having smart, business savvy chief compliance officers or control room managers that can put forth an argument that is not just about compliance. It's like, here is where we are. We have these exposure areas. This is the risk. Here are real life cases, whether you utilize the one you were talking about yesterday, or whether you leverage things like when the SEC came out and stated that they were going to focus on insider trading as a result of what's going on with the pandemic, or whether you look at the CFTC came out with some guidance around how they were going to pursue situations and investigations and what firms were doing, or whether you look at any other insider trading case that's out there. Leveraging that information to present an argument, I think is where control rooms are either going to be successful in getting the funding or not. And then last but not least, Tim, I think that what you said a moment ago about it is a tight community. we sponsor a control room roundtable. There's a larger control room table that's out there, but I've always found it wonderful that folks in the industry come together to share knowledge, to share experiences, to talk about and just reflect on what's going on. So I would pipe into those communities to gain ideas, and certainly I know StarCompliance and compliance risk concepts are more than happy to have conversations with folks as well to provide just simple guidance, just having a conversation, because that's what we love to do. So
yeah, exactly. And I think it, for us, obviously, as a software vendor, where we're building a community as well of control room specialists that are also using the same platform as well, hopefully accelerates and augments that process so that it's both the technology is common as well as the challenge and the the processes as well. So I think we're coming up on our time. So Steve, it just remains me to thank you very much for that discussion over the last hour, and yeah, looking forward to the follow-up soon on the next generation of the control room software. Thanks a lot, Steve.
Here with you today. Thanks for your time, folks.